Paranormal experiences don't really work to a timescale, and therefore we invite you to listen to a Dark Minisode. Hello everyone and welcome to another installment of a Dark Minisode. Firstly, a huge thank you for all of the correspondence over the last week, and believe me, we've had an influx. Secondly, thank you for all of your submissions for next season. Now, a quick shout to say that we are still and we always are accepting submissions anytime, no matter the length. Because basically, regardless of the length of your submission, we will find somewhere to air it. And we will make sure it gets heard by one of our many audiences, be it on a minisode, Dark Bites for our patrons, or indeed on the main show. And you can submit your own experience by going in the show notes and clicking on Submit My Experience, or go direct to thedarkparanormal.com and click on Submit My Experience there. In the show notes, you'll also find a link to our Patreon, which we're giving a free week away at our highest tier. Now, within the highest tier, you'll gain access to early releases, ad-free releases, and also access to Dark Bites, the Patreon-only show, and its entire back catalogue of over 190 hours, plus access to our new show, After Dark, which is a 30-minute, non-edited, constant stream of consciousness from me about the things we've spoken about in the last week. Being a new show, we're currently running that bi-weekly, and it will turn into a weekly show for our Patreons from next season onwards. So you can either click the link in the show notes, which will take you to Patreon, or go direct to patreon.com/thedarkparanormal. But right now, it's that time of the week where I ask you to find 15 to 20 minutes to yourself, sit down, make a nice drink, and listen to the fire and the figure. Hi Kev, I just want to say I've been a listener since you began. I work nights as a security guard at a logistics warehouse just outside of Edinburgh, and your show genuinely gets me through the longer shifts. I'm literally writing this down during one of those long shifts, and writing this down makes it feel more real again. And I'm not sure I should have actually began. But anyway, here we go. My name is Jamie, I'm 34, and most of what I'm about to describe happened in the house I grew up in, a stone terraced property in a former mining village in County Durham, northeast England. Not one single event, more like a slow accumulation of things over about 14 years that, when you stack them all together, paint a picture I can never explain away. A short background, because I do think this matters. My mum raised my brother and me mostly on her own, after my dad left when I was 7. She worked 2 jobs for most of my childhood. My gran moved into the spare bedroom shortly after Dad left, to act as a secondary parent figure, so she could help bring us up. There was a lot of tension within that house growing up. Financial stress, my brother going off the rails as a teenager. My mum was exhausted all the time. Since listening to your show, I've come to think that atmosphere fed whatever was in that house, because the activity always seemed worse during the rough patches. I know people say they hate hearing about layouts, but I'll give a quick one because it will help. The house is a Victorian 2 up, 2 down. It had a rear extension added sometime in the 80s. From the street, you'd have a small front garden, a painted black door which led straight into a sitting room. To the right of the sitting room was a narrow staircase, and at the top of those stairs, straight ahead was mine and my brother's old room. To the left, Grandma's room, which technically wasn't a room, it was very, very small. And to the far left, my mother's room. The shared bathroom was at the far end of the landing. Back downstairs, through the sitting room into the kitchen, which ran across the whole back of the original building, the extension added a utility room off the kitchen and a conservatory beyond that. A conservatory which always felt wrong to me. Cold even in summer. and the kind of room where you never wanted to sit alone after dark. Off the utility room, there was a door to the backyard, and at the far end of that yard was a detached storage shed that my mum used for tools and boxes. A narrow passage ran along the side of the house, connecting the front and the back gardens. Gran's tiny box room, which she would refer to as her flat, had a window that looked directly down into the backyard. The first thing I remember is the bedroom door. Mine and my brother's bedroom had a latch-style handle, the old kind. And from about age 9 or 10, we'd wake in the early hours and find it stood open. I was obsessive about closing it before I slept. I hated the darkness of the landing, so finding it open always unsettled me. The first few times I accused my brother, then I assumed my mum had looked in on one of us. But then I started noticing a feeling that came with it. Not just the open door, but a heaviness, a sense that the air in the room had changed, like something had recently passed through. That's the best way I can describe it. I'd lie, rigid, staring at the corner near the wardrobe, convinced something was standing there just outside what my eyes could confirm. But I'd pull the duvet over my head and start counting until I fell asleep. Sometimes I'd end up padding down to my mum's room and getting in beside her without even being able to explain why. Years later, my brother said the exact same thing would happen to him with this door, but I would be asleep. But he would see something with it. A dark mass near the corner where this door swung open. He described the mass as low and wide, like a crouching shape. He only ever mentioned it once and immediately changed the subject. The first major experience wasn't mine. It was my Gran's, and we didn't hear about it until after the fire. In the winter of 2009, a fire started in the utility room. It took the back wall of the kitchen before the fire brigade turned up to get it under control. The rebuild took the best part of 4 months. It was during this period, when the builders were in and the house was half gutted, that my Gran finally told us what she'd seen on the night the fire started. She said she'd been at her flat window, couldn't sleep. She said she sat up late watching the yard very often. And she saw a figure come through from the passage from the front of the house. It crossed the yard slowly and stopped outside the shed door. She described it as a tall woman in a long dark coat. Unhurried, deliberate. Gran thought at first it was a neighbour, possibly Mrs. Farrow from 2 doors down, who'd passed away the previous spring. A tall woman, always in that same heavy wool coat, regardless of the season. My nan believed she had a gift for seeing the dead. The figure stood for a moment, then moved through the shed wall. Not around it, through it. Gran said 5 minutes later, she emerged from the shed, through the wall again, this time holding something she couldn't quite make out. She said the woman stopped and looked up at her window, as if to acknowledge her, then began walking towards the conservatory. She said the figure looked back up at Gran, then towards the utility room, and then disappeared. Within 20 minutes, she smelt smoke from downstairs. Gran said she hadn't planned to say anything, thinking no one would believe her. But when the builders opened up the kitchen wall during the repair work, they found evidence of previous fire damage from decades earlier. Scorch marks on the original timber behind the plasterwork. Never repaired, just buried. Gran went kind of quiet after that. She said maybe the woman hadn't caused the fire. Maybe she'd come to show her where it had happened before. Today's episode of The Dark Paranormal is brought to you by Progressive Insurance. Fiscally responsible, financial geniuses, monetary magicians. These are things people say about drivers who switch their car insurance to Progressive and save hundreds. Because Progressive offers discounts for paying in full, owning a home, and more. Plus, you can count on their great customer service to help you when you need it. So your dollar goes a long way. Visit Progressive.com to see if you could save on car insurance. Progressive Casualty Insurance Companies and affiliates' potential savings will vary, not available in all states or situations. The activity stepped up after the rebuild. I don't remember a clear sequence, so I'll just describe the ones that stayed with me. The first was the only time I saw something directly. I was about 19, sitting in the conservatory late on a Sunday afternoon with Gran. We were watching an old crime serial she liked. The conservatory looked out on the backyard through some glass-panelled doors, and the shed which my Gran had seen the figure emerge from had long since been replaced with a newer one. I'd been half expecting my mum home from her shift at the care home. She always came through the side passage and in through the back conservatory. Our dog at the time was a big grey lurcher called Moss. Moss would bark at any footsteps outside, and he'd follow my mum from the gate to the door like an escort. I heard the passage gate scrape open, a very distinctive sound, wood on concrete, and I glanced towards the backyard, expecting to see her in my peripheral vision on my right, walking beside the conservatory towards its door. Instead, I saw what I was certain was Moss, moving along the fence line, head low, tracking someone just out of frame. I got up anyway and went to the back door. My mum wasn't home. The gate was shut. And Moss was asleep, upstairs, under my brother's bed. I checked twice. I went back and sat with my Gran, and I didn't say a word to her or to anyone else. The second experience was shared with my mum and my brother. We were all in the kitchen. I can't remember why we were all in there at the same time. It wasn't a very big kitchen. And my mum and my brother were leaning against the counter while I was at the table. A heavy ceramic mug that had been sitting on the draining board simply launched itself. Not fell, launched, clearing the edge of the sink and landing squarely in the centre of the kitchen floor without breaking. We all watched it land. No one spoke for a good 5 seconds. Aside from the obvious creepiness of the fact it launched itself, it also landed upright. And despite the fact it was heavy, towards the top end of it, it was rather thin. You could say fragile. Landing from that height should have at the very least caused a crack. But it remained immaculate. Then my brother went over and picked it up, placed it back, and my mum turned back to whatever she'd been doing. No one mentioned a thing. That's how we dealt with things in that house. Toward the end of my time living there, maybe the last 2 or 3 years before I moved out at 22, something started happening in the conservatory at night. I'd often be in the kitchen late, working or watching something on my laptop. And our second dog, a small terrier cross called Biscuit, whose demeanour, I'll add, is nowhere near as cute as her name would imply, would sometimes get up from her bed and walk to the conservatory door. She would stand there with every hair on her back raised, staring into the dark of the conservatory, growling low and continuous, never barking, just growling. And Biscuit would bark at everything. The postman, cats, foxes, her own reflection. She never growled. The first time it happened, I turned everything off and went to look through the glass into the conservatory. Nothing. Just the dark yard beyond. But the feeling of being looked at from somewhere in that dark was so strong, I physically stepped back. After that, whenever she did it, I'd pick her up and take her upstairs. Every time as I carried her, she'd crane her neck to look back over my shoulder at whatever was behind us. I would never turn around. The last set of experiences were my brother's. He'd gotten into photography in his early 20s. Decent enough that he sold some prints occasionally. And he had a habit of taking shots around the house, testing lenses. He showed me two that he said he'd never been able to explain. The first was taken in the backyard, my brother facing the camera with the shed behind him. In the doorway of the shed, which was stood open, there was a pale shape at roughly child height. Featureless, faint, but clearly there. The proportions wrong in a way that is hard to pin down. He didn't notice the figure until he was editing it later. The second was taken inside Gran's flat while she was letting him practice portraits. He'd been taking test shots towards the window that looked down into the yard. In the lower corner of the frame, not in the yard, in the room, close to the skirting, there was a tall, dark shape, with 2 points of reflected light at face height. He said he looked up from his camera screen, turned, and the corner was empty. He left Gran's flat and didn't go back in that day. He told me he deleted the second photo, but I don't think he did. I think he just stopped looking at it. My mum had two things she mentioned, both auditory. The first, she'd sometimes come home to an empty house and hear what she described as a low murmur of conversation coming from the conservatory, like a room full of people talking quietly with music underneath. The moment she opened the kitchen door, it would stop. The second, she'd be in the house alone and she'd hear one of us call her name from the top of the stairs. My name, specifically. Clear as anything. She'd go to the foot of the stairs and there'd be no one there. She'd go up and check and she'd realise no one was in the house. She only told us this after we'd both moved away. That's the full picture of that house as best I can put it together. There's been a few things since I've lived elsewhere, but nothing with that same sustained feeling of being watched and tested over the years. If you want to hear those, I'm happy to write them up. Thanks for what you do, Kev. There aren't many places you can send something like this and not feel daft in doing so. Jamie. Well, Jamie, thank you so much for providing this week's minisode. And this is one of those fascinating ones for me because there are that many potential theories and jump-off points. For example, the lady Mrs. Farrow, was it, 2 doors down, and your nan seeing this figure, but seemingly not being afraid of it. Also, the way you give an off-cuff mention to the fact your nan believed she could see the dead. I'd love to know more on that. And in answer to your question about sending more stories in, we all know the answer, yes. But until next time, everyone, stay safe and take care.